Good afternoon. I'm here today. We're doing a reading of Eudora Welty from her collected works. Today we're going to be reading A Worn Path. We're reading these collected works, getting ready for Dr. Helen's upcoming episode in November. We're going to be talking about Eudora Welty. Dr. Helen did her dissertation on Eudora Welty. So we're going to be reading a few of her stories from her collected works before Dr. Helen's episode to get ready for what we're going to be talking about. And so hello, Dr. Helen. So you can pick this book up, Eudora Welty's collected works, at your local library. I got my copy from Half Price Books. So I just popped into Half Price Books and grabbed it there. So I also wanted to talk about, we have a contest. Dr. Helen was so generous that she has given us two books to give away by Eudora Welty. These are children's books called The Shoebird. Those are going to be a lot of fun to give away. And you can check our page on the rules of the contest. It's really just, we have some essay questions. You can answer those essay questions. You can answer one, you can answer both, you can answer as many times as you want, whatever you want to do. You can email them to us or send them via direct message. Our email address is included in there. It's chitchattingwithbecca@gmail.com. And so, anybody who answers those essay questions and sends us in an essay will get a Chit Chatting with Becca button that looks like, I will show you because I have them right here on my Chit Chatting desk. It looks like this because it is absolutely over the top ridiculous. Everybody will get one of those if that answers, and then Helen and I will read the essay questions, and we will choose two folks to give these books away. And so this is the first of many contests that we're going to do. We're going to do some giveaways and some contests just to continue to engage you all in conversation, which is what we want to do. We want to engage you all in conversation so you can enjoy the show and have a little bit of fun. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started because the Cowboys are playing and I have the game paused. So I got to get going. So Eudora Welty, today we're going to read A Worn Path. And I just wanted to, there are a few words that I will be changing when I read this, just because that's what we do. I'm not censoring. I'm just changing the words to be a little bit more modern, and they're not words that I say, so I'm not going to say them. Anyway, so A Worn Path. And this one that long, so we should probably get through it here pretty quickly. I will also say that I do have some learning challenges. It is very difficult for me to read. It is also very difficult for me to comprehend. So I step out of my comfort zone a lot when I read these online. I do have a stutter. So it is also very difficult to manage that stutter. So if I stop for a few minutes and sound like I'm trying to get something out, it's just my stutter that's kind of coming in a little bit. So let me get a big old gulp of my mas agua, por favor. And because you got to stay hydrated. You got to hydrate because even though it's nice and cool outside, it's dry. So here we go. And I hope that you all are enjoying the weather because it is delightful in North Texas today. So let's get started. A Worn Path. It was a bright frozen day in the early morning. Far out in the country, there was an old African-American woman with her head tied in a red rag coming along a path through the pine woods. Her name was Phoenix Jackson. What a fantastic name, Phoenix. She was very old and small and walked slowly in the dark pine shadows, moving a little from side to side in her steps, with the balanced heaviness and lightness of a pendulum and a grandfather clock. She carried a thin, small cane made from an umbrella, and with this she kept tapping the frozen earth in front of her. This made a grave and persistent noise in the air and seemed meditative, like the chirping of a solitary little bird. She wore a dark striped dress reaching down to her shoe tops and an equally long apron of bleached sugar sacks with a full pocket, all neat and tidy. But every time she took a step, she might have fallen over, her shoelaces which dragged from her unlaced shoes. She looked straight ahead. Her eyes were blue with age. Her skin had a pattern all its own of numberless branching wrinkles, and as though a whole little tree stood in the middle of her forehead. But a golden color ran underneath, and the two knobs of her cheeks were illuminated by a yellow burning under the dark. Under the red rag, her hair came down on her neck in the frailest of ringlets, still black and with an odor like copper. Now and then there was a quivering in the old thicket. Old Phoenix said, "Get out of my way, all you foxes, owls, beetles, jackrabbits, coons, and wild animals. Keep out from under these feet, little bobwhites. Keep the big wild hogs out of my path. Don't let none of those come running in my direction. I got a long way." Under her small, black freckled hand, her cane, limber as a buggy whip, would switch at the bushes as if to rouse up any hiding things. On she went. The woods were deep and still. The sun made the pine needles almost too bright to look up at. Up where the wind rocked, the cones dropped as light as feathers. Down in the hollow was a mourning dove. It was not too late for him. The path ran uphill. Seem like there is chains about my feet. Time I get this far, she said in a voice of argument old people keep to use with themselves. Something always take a hold of me on this hill. Pleads I should stay. After she got to the top, she turned and gave a full, severe look behind her, where she had come up. Up through pines, she said at length. Now down through oaks. I do that when I get to the top of the hill. If I'm hiking or walking or running or anything like that, I always turn around and see where I've come from. Her eyes opened her widest, and she stared down gently. But before she got to the bottom of the hill, a bush caught her dress. Her fingers were busy and intent, but her skirts were full and long, so that before she could pull them free in one place, they were caught in another. It was not possible to allow the dress to tear. I in the thorny bush, she said. Thorns, you doing your appointed work. Never want to let folks pass. No, sir. Old eyes thought you was a pretty little green bush. Finally, trembling all over, she stood free, and after a moment dared to stoop for her cane. Sun so high, she cried, leaning back and looking while the thick tears went over her eyes. The time getting all gone here. At the foot of this hill was a place where a log was laid across the creek. Now comes the trial, said Phoenix. Putting her right foot out, she mounted the log and shut her eyes. Lifting her skirt, leveling her cane fiercely before her, like a festival figure in some parade, she began to march across. I could see her. I could just see her marching right across that log. Then she opened her eyes, and she was safe on the other side. I wasn't as old as I thought, she said. But she sat down to rest. She spread her skirts on the bank around her and folded her hands over her knees. Up above her was a tree in a pearly cloud of mistletoe. She did not dare to close her eyes, and when a little boy brought her a plate with a slice of marbled cake on it, she spoke to him. That would be acceptable, she said. But when she went to take it, there was just her own hand in the air. So she left that tree and had to go through a barbed wire fence where she had to creep and crawl, spreading her knees and stretching her fingers out like a baby trying to climb the steps. But she talked loudly to herself. She could not let her dress be torn now, so late in the day, and she could not pay for having her arm or leg sawed off if she got caught fast where she was. She couldn't pay for her arm or her leg to get sawed off. At last she was safe through the fence and risen up out in the clearing. Big dead trees, like black men with one arm, were standing in the purple stalks of the withered cotton field. There sat a buzzard. Who you watching? In the furrows she made her way along. Glad this not the season for bulls, she said, looking sideways, and the good Lord made his snakes to curl up and sleep in the winter. A pleasure I don't see no two-headed snake coming around that tree where it come once. It took a while to get him by back in the summer. She passed through the old cotton and went onto a field of dead corn. It whispered and shook and was taller than her head. Through the maze now, she said, for there was no path. Then there was something tall, black, and shiny there, moving before her. At first she took it for a man, but it could have been a man dancing in the field. But she stood still and listened, and it did not make a sound. It was as silent as a ghost. Ghost, she said sharply, who be you the ghost of? For I have heard of nary death close by. But there was no answer, only the ragged dancing in the wind. She reached out her hand and touched a sleeve. She found a coat, and inside it an emptiness, cold as ice. You scarecrow, she said, her face lightened. I ought to be shut up for good, she said with laughter. My sense is gone. I too old. I the oldest people I ever know. Dance, old scarecrow, she said, while I dance with you. She kicked her foot over the furrow and with mouth drawn down, shook her head once or twice in a little strutting way. Some husks blew down and whirled in streamers about her skirts. Then she went on, parting her way from side to side with the cane through the whispering field. At last she came to the end, to a wagon track where the silver grass blew between the red ruts. The quail were walking around like pullets, seemingly all dainty and unseen. Walk pretty, she said. This the easy place, this the easy going. She followed the track, swaying through the quiet bare fields, through the little strings of trees, silver in their dead leaves, past cabins silver from weather, with the doors and windows boarded shut, like all like old women under a spell sitting there. I walking in their sleep, she said, nodding her head vigorously. In a ravine she went where a spring was silently flowing through a hollow log. Old Phoenix bit down and drank. Sweet gum makes the water sweet, she said, and drank more. Nobody knew who made this well, for it was here when I was born. The track crossed a swampy part where the moss hung as white as lace from every limb. Sleep on, alligators, and blow your bubbles. Then the track went onto the road. Deep, deep the road went down between the high green-colored banks. Overhead the live oaks met, and it was as dark as a cave. A black dog with a lolling tongue came up out of the weeds by the ditch. She was meditating and not ready. And when he came at her, she only hit him a little with her cane. Over she went in the ditch, like a little puff of milkweed. Down there, her senses drifted away. Her dream visited her, and she reached her hand up, but nothing reached down to give her pull. So she lay there and presently went to talking. Old woman, she said to herself, that black dog come up out of the weeds to stall you off, and now there he's sitting on his fine tail smiling at you. A white man finally came along and found her, a hunter, a young man, with his dog on a chain. Well, Granny, he laughed, what are you doing there? Lying on my back like a June bug, waiting to be turned over, mister, she said, reaching up her hand. He lifted her up, gave her a swing in the air and set her down. Anything broken, Granny? No, sir, just them old dead weeds is springy enough, said Phoenix when she had got her breath. I thank you for your trouble. Where do you live, Granny? He asked, while the two dogs were growling at each other. Away back yonder, sir, behind the ridge. You can't even see it from here. On your way home? No, sir, I go to town. Why, that's too far. That's as far as I walk when I come out myself to get That's as far as I walk when I come out myself, and I get something for my trouble. He patted the stuffed bag he carried, and there hung down a little closed claw. It was one of the bob whites, with its beak hooked bitterly to show it was dead. Now you go on home, Granny. I bound to go to town, mister, said Phoenix. The time has come around. He gave her another laugh, filling the whole landscape. I know I know you old African American people wouldn't miss going to town to see Santa Claus. But something held old Phoenix very still. The deep lines in her face went into a fierce and different radiation. Without warning, she had seen with her own eyes a flashing nickel fall out of the man's pocket onto the ground. How old are you, Granny? He said. There's no telling, mister, she said. No telling. Then she gave a little cry and clapped her hands and said, Get on away from here, dog. Look at that dog. She laughed as if in admiration. He ain't scared of nobody. He a big black dog. She whispered, Sick him. Watch me get rid of that cur, said the man. Sick him, Pete. Sick him. Phoenix heard the two dogs fighting. He heard the man running and throwing sticks. She even heard a gunshot. But she was slowly bending forward by that time, further and further forward. The lids stretched down over her eyes as if she was doing this in her sleep. Her chin was lowered almost to her knees. The yellow palm of her hand came out from the folds of her apron. Her fingers slid down and along the ground under the piece of money with the grace and care they would have in lifting an egg from under a sitting hen. Then she slowly straightened up. She stood erect, and the nickel was in her apron pocket. A bird flew by. Her lips moved. God watching me the whole time I come to stealing. The man came back, and his own dog panted about him. Well, I scared him off that time, he said, and then he laughed and lifted his gun and pointed it at Phoenix. She stood straight and faced him. Don't the gun scare you, he said, still pointing it. No, sir. I've seen plenty go off closer by in my day, and for less than what I done, she said, holding utterly still. He smiled and shouldered the gun. Well, Granny, he said, you must be 100 years old and scared of nothing. I'd give you a dime if I had any money with me, but you take my advice and stay home, and nothing will happen to you. What an asshole. Sorry. I'm bound to go on my way, mister, said Phoenix. She inclined her head in her red rag. Then they went in different directions, but she could hear the gun shooting again and again over the hill. She walked on. The shadows hung from the oak trees and the road like curtains. Then she smelled wood smoke and she saw a steeple and the cabins on their steep steps. Dozens of little black children whirled around her. There ahead was Natchez shining. Bells were ringing. She walked on. In the paved city, it was Christmas time. There were red and green electric lights strung and crisscrossed everywhere, and all turned on in the daytime. Old Phoenix would have been lost if she had not distrusted her eyesight and depended on her feet to know where to take her. She paused quietly on the sidewalk where people were passing by. A lady came along in the crowd carrying an armful of red, green, and silver-wrapped presents. She gave off perfume like the red roses in hot summer, and Phoenix stopped her. Please, Missy, will you lace up my shoe? She held up her foot. What do you want, Grandma? See my shoes, said Phoenix. Do all right for out in the country, but wouldn't look right to go in a big building. Stand still, then, Grandma, said the lady. She put her packages down on the sidewalk beside her and laced and tied both shoes tightly. Can't lace 'em with a cane, said Phoenix. Thank you, Missy. I didn't mind asking a nice lady to tie up my shoe, but when I gets out on the street, moving slowly from side to side, she went into the big building and into the tower of steps, where she walked up and around until her feet knew to stop. She entered a door where she saw nailed, and there she saw nailed up on the wall the document that had been stamped with the gold steel and framed in the gold frame, which matched the dream that was hung up in her head. Here I be, she said. There was a fixed and ceremonial stiffness over her body. A charity case, I suppose, said the attendant who sat at her desk before her. But Phoenix only looked above her head. There was sweat on her face, and the wrinkles in her skin showed like a bright net. Speak up, Grandma, the woman said. What's your name? We must have your history, you know. Have you been here before? What seems to be the trouble with you? Old Phoenix only gave a twitch to her face, as if a fly were bothering her. Are you deaf? Cried the attendant. But then the nurse came in. Oh, that's just old Aunt Phoenix, she said. She doesn't come for herself. She has a little grandson. She makes these trips just as regular as clockwork. She lives way back off the old Natchez Trace. She bent down. Well, Aunt Phoenix, why don't you just take a seat? We won't keep you standing after your long trip, she pointed. Finally, somebody was nice to her. The old woman sat down, bolt upright in the chair. Now, how is the boy? Asked the nurse. Old Phoenix did not speak. I said, how is the boy? But old Phoenix only waited and stared straight ahead, her face very solemn and withdrawn into rigidity. Is his throat any better? Asked the nurse. Aunt Phoenix, don't you hear me? Is your grandson's throat any better since the last time you came for medicine? With her hands on her knees, the old woman waited, silent, erect, and most motionless, as if she were in armor. You mustn't take up our time this way, Aunt Phoenix, the nurse said. Tell us quickly about your grandson and get it over. He isn't dead, is he? At last there came a flicker and then a flame of comprehension across her face as she spoke. My grandson. It was my memory had left me. I sat there and forgot why I made the long trip. Forgot? The nurse frowned. After you came so far? Then Phoenix was like an old woman begging a dignified forgiveness for waking up frightened in the night. I never did go to school. I was told I was too old at the surrender, she said in a soft voice. I'm an old woman without an education. It was my memory failed me. My little grandson, he is just the same, and I forgot it in the coming. Throat never heals, does it? Said the nurse, speaking a loud, sure voice to old Phoenix. By now she had a card with something written on it, a little list. Yes, swallowed lie. Swallowed lie, poor thing. When was it? January 2-3 years ago? Phoenix spoke unasked now. Missy, he's not dead. He, just the same. Every little while his throat began to close up again, and he not able to swallow. He not get his breath. He not able to help himself. So the time come around, and I go on another trip for the soothing medicine. All right, the doctor said as long as you came to get it, you could have it, said the nurse. But that's an obstinate case. But it's an obstinate case. My little grandson, he sat up there in the house all wrapped up, waiting by himself, Phoenix went on. We is the only two left in the world. He's suffering, and it don't seem to put him back at all. He's got a sweet look. He going to last. He wear a little patch quilt and peep out holding open his mouth like a little bird. I remember so plain now. I'm not going to forget him again. Nope. The whole enduring time. I could tell him from all others in the creation. All right, the nurse was trying to hush her now. She brought her a bottle of medicine. Charity, she said, making a check mark in a book. Old Phoenix held the bottle close to her eyes and then carefully put it into her pocket. I thank you, she said. It's Christmas time, Grandma, said the attendant. I could give you a few pennies out of my purse. 5 pennies is a nickel, said Phoenix stiffly. Here's a nickel, said the attendant. Phoenix rose carefully and held out her hand. She received the nickel and then fished the other nickel out of her pocket and laid it beside the new one and stared at her palm closely, with her head on one side. Then she gave a tap with her cane on the floor. This is what come to me to do, she said. I go into the store and buy my child a little windmill they sells, made out of paper. He's going to find it hard to believe there's such a thing in this world. I'll march myself back where he waiting, holding it straight up in his hand. She lifted her free hand and gave a little nod, turned around and walked out of the doctor's office. Then her slow step began on the stairs, going down. That was a great story. It was very vivid in my head. I could see every step that she was taking through the fields and through the woods and over the log and into town, asking people to give her help. That was a great story. That was a really great story. So our next story that we're going to read next week is, what's the next one? The next one is The Wide Net. So join us next week on Sunday at 2:30, and I'll be reading The Wide Net. Is that what I had said? I just forgot. The Wide Net. I'll be reading that. And let's see. Helen says fun things. And yes, that guy was a jerk. I mean, I'm glad that he helped her up off the ground, but I think she wanted to smack him with her cane. But it was a great story. I enjoyed it, and I'm really enjoying all of Eudora Welty's books right now. So we'll see you next week at 2:30 for another reading on Sunday, and then don't forget that we are not doing a show, Chit-Chatting with Becca, on next Saturday because we're going to be doing Sister Monday with Dr. Helen. But tune in because, you never know. Keep your eyeballs open. You never know when we're going to do a little live broadcast. So we'll see you then. And I sure do thank you for joining me. And we'll see you later.